Welcome everyone to DA Sports. I'm your host DASASIN. I want to thank you guys for checking in again. This is episode number 7. We got a lot to get into today. We're going to do a recap of the football games from Saturday, the games that I picked, plus another game that I didn't pick, but we're going to talk about because it was very interesting. We're also going to recap my NFL picks from week number 4. We're then going to lead into the question of the week. And then we're going to end, of course, with my top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings after week 4. So let's get into it. Okay, for starters, we're going to talk about all of the NCAA football games that we previously spoke about in the previous episode. So, if you recall, there were 3 games that I picked. These were the 3 games with the highest ranked opponents on both sides. For starters, I did pick Notre Dame to cover the 6.5 point spread against Louisville. It was a close game, but I was correct. Notre Dame did cover the spread. Final score was 31-24, so that's a difference of 7. So Notre Dame minus 6.5 was a winner. Definitely gave Notre Dame some more confidence, with them it being the second game after their Northern Illinois loss. So they got to face a ranked opponent, pretty much made their ranking more of a standard so that they could get back up in the good graces of Notre Dame fans, showing that they can actually compete against another top team. So a good win for them there. The other game was Illinois at Penn State. Now, if you recall, the spread on this game was 19.5. And I said previously that even though I expected Penn State to win, I did expect that they wouldn't cover the 19.5 spread. So I said Illinois plus 19.5. And again, I was correct on that prediction. The final score was 21-7, so a difference of 14. So again, Penn State did get the win as I predicted, but Illinois did cover the spread. I actually think the game could have been a lot closer. Illinois pretty much messed up a few opportunities that they had to get into better scoring position. But nonetheless, Penn State did what they were supposed to do. They did win by double digits against a ranked opponent, so that is a positive for them as they head deeper and deeper into Big Ten play and face tougher and tougher opponents. The last of the games that I picked for last episode was, of course, the most exciting game of the weekend and the one involving the 2 highest ranked teams, and that was Alabama and Georgia. Going into the game, Alabama was ranked 4, Georgia was ranked 2. This is definitely a tough SEC rivalry game. The spread was 1. I did pick Georgia to win and cover that 1-point spread, and I was wrong. For those that didn't see the game, you definitely missed out on an instant classic. Alabama came out from the jump, basically stomping out Georgia as soon as the opening kickoff. They dominated the first half. I believe the score at halftime was like 30-7. It looked like it was going to be a complete beatdown. And then in the second half, Georgia just started playing free. Carson Beck started throwing up more jump balls to one-on-one receivers, and the receivers were winning. And they were able to come back. Not only were they able to come back and make it close, they actually took the lead late in the fourth quarter, which was crazy. The tide shift, no pun intended, with all the people in the crowd who were just anxiously trying to figure out what was going on, how they went from being dominantly ahead to being behind late in the fourth quarter. And then just as quick as they lost the lead, they gained it back with the very next play, a deep bomb 1-on-1 scenario, which is actually what both quarterbacks have been doing late in the game. And Jalen Milroe threw a long touchdown pass that put Alabama back up, and they were able to go for 2 and be up by 7 points, what turned out to be the final score of the game. Final score was 41-34. The game ended with an interception in the end zone as Georgia tried to tie the game again with the similar play that I was talking about. It was another jump ball, one-on-one coverage, and the freshman corner for Alabama saw it coming, expected it, got in good position, and high-pointed the ball for the interception to seal the fate in Alabama's win against Georgia. So it was a great game, great rivalry game, great way to kick off, the deeper part of SEC play. and definitely gets us excited for some more of the SEC rivalry games to come. I was 2-1 in terms of my NCAA picks this week, which of course is still good. There was one more game though I wanted to talk about that I didn't pick, and that was the UCF and Colorado game. Going into this season, moving into the Big 12, a lot of people said that they were going to finish close to last in the Big 12. I believe they were only favored to win one of their Big 12 matchup games. And going into this UCF game at UCF in what were expected to be rainy conditions, the game was pushed back due to weather because of the hurricane. But it didn't actually rain too hard during the game, so the game itself was clear. UCF was favored to win by 14 points. And Colorado whooped them from start to finish. It was actually the most complete game that we've seen from Colorado since Deion Sanders has been there. Final score was 48-21. So Colorado won by 27 points in a game they were favored to lose by 14. It's absolutely amazing. Now, granted, UCF was no world beater. They weren't ranked previously before this game, but they are considered a good team. They are a team that was considered to finish somewhere in the top 2 to 3 in the Big 12 conference. Having seen Colorado beat UCF the way they did, it actually gives a lot of people a lot of confidence for the rest of the Big 12 matchups, and seeing that maybe, just maybe, Colorado will be able to compete against the other Big 12 schools and maybe even find themselves in a Big 12 championship game. And if they in the Big 12 championship game, they might even make it to the NCAA playoffs, which would be astounding considering that Colorado only won one game 2 seasons ago. So that would be amazing. Speaking of Colorado, though, in itself, we have to talk about Travis Hunter. Now, I know right now I believe he's second or third in odds for the Heisman, but to me it's absolutely ridiculous. I think the only reason he's second and third in the odds to win the Heisman is because the projection is that Colorado won't win too many more games, and so because Colorado won't finish with a great record, he won't get an opportunity to be up for the Heisman. But Travis Hunter is by far the best player in college football, and honestly, it's not close. Not that there's not other people who are just as good as he is on the offensive side of the ball. There's definitely great quarterback play from Ewers to Ward to Carson Beck to Milroe to Shedeur Sanders even. And there's also some defensive players who have been playing well also. The difference is that Travis Hunter plays well. No, let me rephrase that. Travis Hunter plays elite on both sides of the ball, and not for just packages. I believe he played over 120 plays in this last game. Again, he got an interception, he got a receiving touchdown. It's just absolutely amazing, because the hardest part too is being able to have the stamina to stay elite. People who have played sports know that when you get tired, that's when you lose a lot of your fundamentals. That's when you usually make mistakes. Not only physically because you can't run as fast, can't jump as high, but mental mistakes where you forget where you're supposed to be on certain plays. You don't run your routes as crisp as they should be. You don't maintain your zone as well as you should because you're exhausted, not only physically but mentally. So the fact that he's able to go back and forth and play so many plays and play them at a high level is just beyond anything we could comprehend. I honestly think that as long as Colorado doesn't lose the rest of their games, if they finish the year with 4 losses or so, he's definitely got to win the Heisman. Right now, the record for a Heisman Trophy winner on a team with the most losses is 3. I think there's 3 people that have done it. Most recently, obviously last year, Jaden Daniels did it with LSU, who had 3 losses. So if Colorado can make it through the rest of the regular season with only 3 or 4 losses, I think he has to win the Heisman. And even if they lose every single game here on out, he's got to at least be a Heisman finalist to make it to the Heisman ceremony. So we'll see how it pans out. But definitely Travis Hunter has shown to be leaps and bounds above everyone else. And I look forward to seeing him continue to dominate throughout the rest of the season. Now, outside of the NCAA football picks, we got to get into my recap of my NFL picks from week 4. So to start, we're going to talk about my NFL pick 3 for the week. So those that don't remember, my pick 3 are the 3 games that I pick where the outcome could go either way, and I'm picking who I think is going to win the game. So this week, I went 2-1 in my picks. Overall, on my pick 3s, I'm now 6-3, so decent record so far. For my picks, I had the Steelers beating Indianapolis. Unfortunately, that was the one that I was wrong about. The Steelers did lose. Now, even though Indianapolis did get out to an early lead, the Steelers did come back late in the game and were actually in position to try to tie or win the game late, and they fell short. I actually think, interestingly enough, for those that don't know, Anthony Richardson got hurt during the game and they brought in Joe Flacco. Now, Joe Flacco is, I believe, almost 40 now. He's a journeyman. I think that if Joe Flacco doesn't come in and replace Anthony Richardson, I actually think the Steelers come back and win. Joe Flacco's style of play fits more into what is needed to beat Pittsburgh. You have to be accurate. You have to be on time because Pittsburgh flies around. They get after you time and time again, which is what lends itself, part of the reason why I picked Pittsburgh to win, because I felt like that style was going to be detrimental to AR's success and lead to turnovers, which I think would have happened had he still been healthy enough to finish the game. But Flacco was on point with all of his throws, just threading the needle between zones, and they were able to hold on for the win. So that was the one that I was incorrect about, and the Steelers took their first loss on the season. The other game was the Vikings and the Packers. I did say the Vikings would beat the Packers, and they did so fairly easily, even though the final score was really close. The Vikings dominated the beginning of the game. They kind of took their foot off the gas, as they shouldn't, and the Packers were able to claw back into it. Jordan Love made his return from injury and looked pretty decent in the second half. But overall, you have to say the Vikings still continue to look dominant. I'd say the most dominant part of their team is their defense. Now, the fourth quarter of that game, their defense wasn't dominant. I don't know if that was partly because they weren't playing the same style that they were in the beginning. They got a little too relaxed. I don't know, but ultimately, they still got the job done. They put enough pressure on Green Bay in the first half to where they got a lead and were able to hold on to it to get the win, and they remain undefeated. The last game in my pick 3 was the Ravens and the Bills. I did pick the Ravens to beat the Bills, and the Ravens did that pretty easily. For those that watched the game, you know that this was like the first game in a long time that Josh Allen didn't score a touchdown at all. It was a complete blowout from jump. The very first play of the game, Derrick Henry runs for 87 yards, which actually is the longest running touchdown in Baltimore Ravens history. It's actually astonishing. Well, 2 things I thought of when Derrick Henry ran for that long touchdown run. One is, how does somebody that big, who is, I believe he's 6'4", 6'5", 200, somewhere between 240 to 250 pounds, and he was outrunning every single DB on the field. It's amazing. So that was the one I was thinking of, is how does he run that fast, being that size? Especially because he's not like a rookie, you know, he's taken a lot of hits. He's been in the league for a long time and still have that kind of speed to pull away from DBs at that size is just completely impressive. The other thing I thought of was, how did the Cowboys not at least offer Derrick Henry to come to play for Dallas? For those that don't know, Derrick Henry actually lives in Dallas in the offseason. He was actually expecting a call from Dallas in the offseason. Yet they never even offered to see, like, hey, can we get you at a discount, or so on and so forth. And so he ends up in Baltimore. And then in consecutive weeks, he rushes for over 150 yards, including the previous week, which was against the Cowboys. So Jerry Jones has to be kicking himself. I mean, honestly, Jerry Jones probably isn't kicking himself because he thinks he knows best with everything. But that was definitely my second thought when seeing Derrick Henry have such an explosive run to start off the game. And the Ravens dominated the Bills from jump, as I predicted. So the next thing in my pick after the pick 3 was my lock of the week. And finally, I got a lock of the week correct. I was actually 0-2 which is crazy. This week I did pick the Chiefs to beat the Chargers in LA, and they did that. They won 17-10. And they started off rough. Their rookie running back who replaced Pacheco fumbled early in the game. That led to a Chargers score. And then Mahomes threw an interception. I believe that one also led to a score. The worst part of the interception is that it led to an injury by Rashee Rice. And from the looks of it, he's probably going to be out for the rest of the year, which is terrible. It's also, though, a testament to the overall depth of the team of the Chiefs, because they have, as a team, they've had the most impactful injuries of any team in the league, yet they're one of two teams who are still undefeated. They lost their starting running back, who's out for 6 to 8 weeks with a broken leg. It looks like they're out with their number one receiver, who is probably going to be out for the season. And then their number 2 receiver, who the Chiefs picked up in free agency, Hollywood Brown, is probably not going to be back. He hasn't played a single game and got hurt, and probably not going to be back until maybe the playoffs. Maybe. So to have 3 explosive weapons all out and having to rely on a rookie running back who's now fumbled twice in 3 games. Thankfully, they just re-signed Kareem Hunt, who was on the team years ago, and he looked pretty good in relief of Steele, because Steele, after the fumble, didn't really get much playing time. So they got Kareem Hunt, who they just picked up a week ago. They have Carson Steele, who's a rookie running back. And then, obviously, they still have Travis Kelce, who finally started picking it up this week. But after Travis Kelce, who they have to throw the ball to? They got Xavier Worthy, who's definitely fast, and he showed that on his long touchdown catch in this game against the Chargers. But he doesn't have the in-depth route running skill that he needs to be an elite receiver, which is fine at this point because people forget Tyreek Hill was used in the same way that Worthy was when Tyreek Hill was first on the Chiefs. He was not a route runner the way he is now. He was basically used on screen passes and deep passes and trick plays until later in the season he started to pick it up a little bit. But it wasn't until the second and third year when he really started to hone his whole route tree. So Xavier Worthy definitely has time to do that. But for now, he's actually the number 1 receiver, which is crazy. And then behind him, we have Sky Moore, who missed the pass when he was finally given an opportunity, which is continuing what he's done the last 2 years. We have Justin Watson, who has good speed, but he's not an elite receiver at all. We have Juju Smith-Schuster, who obviously was cut from New England, and we know how bad New England is, so the fact that he was cut from New England tells you all you need to know. So definitely the receiver room looks pretty bleak at this moment. There's a lot of interesting talk about potentially trading for another top flight receiver from one of the other teams who are probably in the bottom tier, but we'll see how it goes. And but for now, they keep getting wins. Their defense has definitely stepped up. They held the Chargers to 10 points. They're flying all around even after the Chargers got off to a early start. So I think just like last season, this is pretty much what the Chiefs are going to have to lean into for this season, is leaning on their defense and trying not to turn over the ball so much. I think they're like the only 4-0 team ever to have such a terrible turnover differential this late into the season. So great for them to get the win, and they were to make me finally right on my lock of the week. And then the last pick was my underdog pick of the week, and I was right about this one, which brings me to 2-1 on the year in my underdog picks of the week. For this week, it was the Washington Commanders beating the Arizona Cardinals. The Commanders were favored to lose by 3.5 points, and the game wasn't even close. They won 42-14, and it went exactly as I expected it to. Jaden Daniels continues to prove that he's got himself dialed in with his receiving core. He's, I believe, at 82% completion percentage, which is absolutely absurd, especially for a rookie. I believe the record for completion percentage in a season is set by Drew Brees, which was like mid-70s. I think maybe 74, something like that. So if he can keep this up and break the single season completion percentage record, that would be amazing. I don't expect it to happen, but even the fact that he's this high through 4 games in a season is absolutely amazing. Washington looks great, and they're definitely doing what they need to do and prove me right in my underdog pick of the week. So now that we're done with the picks for the week, we got to get into the question of the week. So again, this question of the week is one that I'm going to present to you to give me feedback on. Tell me who you think is the answer to this question of the week. And I'm going to talk about what you guys' feedback was and who you picked in this answer and talk about it in the following episode. So with all of the injuries that we've seen from crucial starters, crucial stars on teams, the question of the week is, which injury is the most impactful out of these five? Okay, so the first one we're going to start with is Tua Tagovailoa. We've seen how Miami has been so far this season. They've been terrible, and without Tua, they look like they can't get their offense going. So the first person that we're talking about which injury might be the most impactful is going to be Tua Tagovailoa. The next person is going to be Rashee Rice. So Rashee Rice, as I mentioned, got his knee injured in this game against the Chargers. Looks like he's going to be out for the season. I believe he was leading the league in catches going into this game against the Chargers. And for Mahomes, having dealt with what he did last year, not having much receiver help, and the only receiver he could really lean on was Rashee Rice, who was a rookie last year. And for him to now be out, how is that going to be impacting them going forward for the rest of the season? Will they be able to overcome it? We don't know. The next person is Christian McCaffrey. Now, those that know, Christian McCaffrey hasn't played a single game so far this season, and the 49ers are 2-2. Most people didn't expect them to be 2-2 through this part of the season. They're a Super Bowl favorite for a lot of people. I predicted them to make it to the NFC Championship game. Right now, they look pretty much like a mediocre, middle-of-the-road team. Christian McCaffrey not only hasn't played a game, there is no clear timetable of when he's going to be back yet. There's speculation he could even miss the entire season, so nobody knows. So that's one that could be very impactful. The next person I'm going to bring up is A.J. Brown. So A.J. Brown has been injured since week 1. Week 1, he had a huge game, was very productive, helped Philadelphia pull off a close win in Brazil against the Packers, and then he hasn't played since. And Philadelphia's offense has not looked explosive in any game after that. Even though they do have one win in the games that he hasn't played, the offense hasn't looked great. They've also had some other injuries too, but A.J. Brown is the most explosive offensive player on their team. Actually, Saquon Barkley is the most explosive player, but A.J. Brown is the most explosive player in the passing game, and that's the thing that struggled the most for the Eagles. So that's another impactful injury. And the fifth option for the most impactful injury is Cooper Kupp. Now, Cooper Kupp is Matthew Stafford's favorite receiving target. He always tries to look for him, seems like at least 10 times a game. And Cooper Kupp got injured literally the week after Puka Nacua got injured. So it's even more detrimental. I believe the Rams are 1-3 right now. Another thing that people weren't expecting from them. So that is another option for most impactful injury so far this season. So again, your 5 people to choose from as for the answer to the question of the week: Tua Tagovailoa, Rashee Rice, Christian McCaffrey, A.J. Brown, and Cooper Kupp. So you guys let me know who is the most impactful injury so far this season. All right, now to finish off the episode, we got to finish with my top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings after week number 4. So for starters, we got to go with, at 1, the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings are 4-0. They have pretty much dominated a few good teams. They've looked explosive on offense. They've looked explosive on defense. And barring the end of the Green Bay game, their defense has looked pretty dominant from start to finish. So they definitely have to be at 1 for now. They're only one of 2 teams that are still undefeated. And they look the most impressive out of the 2 undefeated teams. So they stay in the number 1 spot. At number 2, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. They are the last of the two undefeated teams so far. They have had close games. All of their games have been within 7 points, and they've been up and down. They've had a lot of turnovers. They're losing the turnover differential in every single game, but they're still winning. The defense still gets stops when they need them. The offense still makes crucial plays when they have to have it. And even with all of the injuries they're fighting through, they're still winning games, and they're still determined to get better. So they still remain as the number 2 team in this week's top 5. Now, after that, here's where it gets interesting, because now that everybody else has at least one loss, it can go anywhere with terms of records. In this case, though, the next 3 teams are all 3-1. At number 3, I had to go with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They did have an ugly loss 2 weeks ago, but if you look at the competition they've had, they've beaten really good teams. Actually, 2 of the teams that they have wins against are also in the top 5. So they definitely deserve at 3-1 to be the number 3 seed. They've looked good on offense and defense, so they are the number 3 team this week. At number 4 is one of those teams that lost to Tampa Bay, is the Detroit Lions. At also 3-1, they look great beating Seattle on Monday Night Football. Seattle was previously undefeated. It was a great game, a lot of explosive offensive plays, and their defense found a way to make stops when they absolutely had to have it. Their defense didn't look as great as they did in other games, but they got the job done. They showed that they have probably the most well-rounded offense in the league. They've got 2 great running backs. They've got 2 top-flight receivers, and they've got a good number 3 receiver and a really good tight end. And Jared Goff was absolutely perfect, going 18 for 18, and he even caught a touchdown pass in that game. So if the Detroit Lions on offense keep playing the way they're playing, then even if their defense does struggle a little bit, they'll be okay. They do have one of the best offensive lines too. So like I said, probably the most well-rounded offense in the league. And so far they are in the number 4 spot. And in the number 5 spot this week, it's pretty surprising. They were actually my underdog pick of the week. That is the Washington Commanders. Who would have thought through 4 weeks that the Washington Commanders would be leading their division? Probably nobody, including myself. But they've looked great. Jaden Daniels has been playing like an elite quarterback, and he's just a rookie. They're 3-1. They have dominated the teams that they needed to dominate. Their offense has looked unstoppable, and their defense seems to be getting better and better each week. So definitely something to look forward to. You know, I know some people might think like, oh, maybe the Buffalo Bills should have been in the 5th spot instead of Washington. But I actually think Washington would have beat the Bills if they played head-to-head. If you think comparatively how Buffalo looked against Arizona, where they were getting dominated early, they came back, and then Arizona had a chance to win late in the game, and they didn't. Whereas with Washington, they dominated Arizona from start to finish. The game was never in doubt. It was never close, and they won pretty handily. Another team that was close to being considered for the top 5 was Baltimore, but I didn't put Baltimore in because even though they looked dominant against the Bills, I can't get rid of how they looked in the previous 2 weeks, not being able to finish games. They choked a win away against the Raiders, and then they almost choked a win away against the Cowboys. So they're fringe. I would have probably Baltimore at 6 right now, but not in the top 5. They haven't been consistent for at least a couple weeks, and that's what Washington has been. So Washington deserves to be in that 5th spot. Now for the worst 5. At 28, I got to go with the New York Giants. They did play a close game against the Cowboys. I think that's more of a referendum on the Cowboys than on the Giants themselves. But yeah, I think they're still a bottom 5 team, even with only 1 win so far on the season. Their offense doesn't seem to be able to get anything done. Their defense looks good in spurts, but they're not good enough to beat any top team. So they are at 28 right now for this week's top 5 and worst 5. At 29, we got to go with the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns are back to looking terrible. Their offense looks putrid. We talked about Deshaun Watson last week in the question of the week about whether or not he was one of the most overpaid quarterbacks in the league. He's definitely in that top 5 group. Ultimately, he was determined to be the most overpaid, but the way he looks is just awful. Their offensive line is just in shambles. So basically, anytime Cleveland plays anyone with a decent defensive line, Cleveland is probably going to lose, and they're probably going to lose handily. If you think about it, they lost to the Raiders, and the Raiders didn't have Max Crosby on defense to pressure them, and they still got pressure. So, yeah, Cleveland is looking into having a very long, disappointing season. So they are at number 29 this week. At number 30, got to go with the Tennessee Titans. They were previously last, so yes, they're making progress. They did move up. But part of the reason why they were in last week is because Will Levis looks to be the worst quarterback in the league right now. And guess what? He still looks to be the worst quarterback in the league. But thankfully, he didn't finish the game. They put in Mason Rudolph, and Mason Rudolph was at least able to do enough to get them a win. Granted, it was against a win against another terrible team, who I'm going to mention here shortly. But nonetheless, they got the job done. They got the win on Monday night. I feel bad for anybody who had to watch that game from start to finish. It was pretty bad. Thankfully, there was another Monday night football game on, so I watched it in split screen, but I kept the audio on the other game because it was terrible. So, but Tennessee moved up 2 spots, so they are now in the 30th spot in this week's Worst 5. Next at 31 is the team they beat, the Miami Dolphins. They look awful. Tyreek Hill was on the sideline, probably crying tears internally, especially with him being on Miami and them being 1-3. And the team he came from, the Kansas City Chiefs, are 4-0. They're back-to-back Super Bowl champions. Think about this. He left to get more money. And since he left, the team he left has won back-to-back Super Bowl championships. And they're currently undefeated, while his team looks horrible. I mean, hey, I guess he has to decide if it was worth it or not. But I'm sure in this very moment, he probably feel like it wasn't. But Miami looks terrible, and that's why they are in that 31 spot for right now. But they're not last because they do have a win. But unfortunately, we have a team that hasn't won a game yet, and they are in 32, the worst team in the league. That is the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mentioned the Jaguars in previous weeks. I mentioned how Trevor Lawrence, to me, is the most overpaid quarterback in the league because there's no progression. He looks to be getting worse and worse, which is crazy considering he just signed a new contract. He's the second highest paid quarterback in the league. There seems to be no progression in the team. Doug Peterson is probably on the hot seat, especially considering that the owner came out before the season saying this is the most talented team they've ever had. I don't think it's the most talented Jags team ever, but definitely the most talented Jags team since he's on the team, so I get why he said it. But the Jags look terrible, and who knows if they're going to win a game anytime soon. But right now, they definitely deserve to be in last place as the only winless team in the NFL. Yeah, so that's where they belong, 32, the worst team in the league. So that wraps up this episode, episode 7. As you can see, I just want to take note, I am wearing my Atlanta Braves shirt with the Atlanta Braves hat in the background. It is the start of MLB playoffs. I didn't really have time to get into all the playoff breakdowns. As I mentioned in episode 1, I am a Braves fan, so I am rooting for them to win against the Padres. To be honest, I don't think it's going to happen, but go Braves nonetheless. Hopefully we can pull it out even without having our best player pretty much the entire season. But that's it for this episode. Please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate everyone that has, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace.